Well, let's join Shehata, Professor of Egyptian and Arab Politics at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for joining us again. You've been disseminating all the information that's been coming through these past few hours. Let's talk about the American position, because from a position early on in January where the administration said they felt the government was safe, the administration was okay, there were no problems, it has now shifted slowly and gradually to some very, very harsh and strong language. How far can they actually go without actually telling Mubarak to step down, which they won't do?
Right. Well, I don't think that things can get more explicit than this. And you're completely right. There has been a significant change from the first day, January 25, when Secretary Clinton expressed her view that Egypt was a stable government and the government was looking into addressing the needs or grievances of the people, to what we saw today. Of course, there have been some claims by people in Egypt, some hopes by people that Mr. Obama would say something even more forceful. Something like, for example, what Ronald Reagan said to Mr. Gorbachev regarding the Berlin Wall. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now, of course, the problem for the American administration, if they were to do something like that, would be what would be the consequence of Mr. Mubarak not doing anything. And in fact, in the speech today, you will remember Mr. Mubarak was quite defiant and said that he is not going to be listening to the dictates of foreigners or external actors. So there's a certain risk of trying to demand explicitly that Mr. Mubarak resign.
But it's also a position where the Americans don't want to really get egg on their face by demanding too much and not receiving anything in return. I mean, we've seen that in the way sometimes how they deal with the Israelis regarding the peace process and settlement building, which is another issue. I mean, indeed, Leon Panetta, the CIA chief, alluded to the fact on Thursday that Mubarak was going to step down, and you see the administration having to backtrack. It's very embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, I think it shows the extent and limited nature, ultimately, of American power. At the same time, we don't know everything that's going on. So, for example, we don't know if the administration has calculated whether the military aid card that they have, Egypt receives $1.3 billion of military aid, whether if they play that card, that'll actually benefit the cause of democracy in a transition, or whether it'll backfire. We don't know that, of course. And you're right, there were indications from the American administration that not only this night, but on the previous two nights of Mr. Mubarak's speeches, that there was a hope or a belief that much more would be delivered, that he would resign, or that delegation of power completely to the vice president. Of course, he's failed 3 times in a row, 3 strikes, as it were.
Of course, leverage is the big issue, and how much leverage, as you mentioned, the US has. Firstly, in terms of the finance that it backs Egypt up with, and then, of course, the political talk. Where do we go in terms of analysing how the administration deals with the military being the pivot around which everything at the moment seems to revolve, and how they deal with the Americans if they are at all behind closed doors?
Right. Well, there's certainly one thing that's been going on, and we saw it on television and in the press, which is high-ranking American officials like Secretary of Defense Gates are on the phone with their counterparts in Egypt. And of course, you'll remember that Mr. Gates said he commended the Egyptian army for their role. And clearly the administration has been sending a message publicly that the use of coercion against peaceful protesters will not be acceptable. And I would imagine that since we haven't seen, since January 27th, 28th or so on, uniformed security officers using violence, openly against the protesters. Of course, we've seen regime thugs use violence. That message is somewhat getting through. But again, the workings and communications behind closed doors are not privy to me or to Al Jazeera or others, so we don't know what else is going on.
No, well, we shall see what does happen as Friday unfolds. Shehata, thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Well, coming up, we'll have more reaction from around the world.
I feel so bad because